I punched her. I have put a bag over her head till she lost consciousness.
You gutted him like a fish in that apartment, too. You were relentless. You stabbed, you stabbed, you stabbed, you stabbed, you stabbed until he was dead.
I do pray that you show me mercy and that you give me a second chance.
In the criminal justice system, where the echoes of the gavel strike fear in the hearts of hardened criminals, there emerged stories of black women committing atrocious crimes and crumbling when faced with the consequences of their actions.
You get what I'm saying? I am the only one throughout both these cases. I haven't lied about anything.
Behind these innocent faces lies a cold heart capable of gruesome murders, kidnappings, and crimes that send shockwaves through the community.
But Your Honor, in spite of what anybody else thinks in this world.
But what happens when these hardened criminals are hit with heavy sentences that take away their freedom for the rest of their lives? Join us as we explore cases of dangerous black women reacting to life sentences. Erica Mae Butts and Shanita Latrice Cunningham. The scenes unfolded in a Charleston courtroom back in November 2011 as Erica Mae Butts and her girlfriend Shanita Latrice Cunningham received the punishment for their terrible crimes, involving the murder of a 3-year-old toddler kept in their care. After Judge Dedra Richardson slammed the lesbian couple with life sentences each, both Erica and Shanita began a dramatic showdown, falling to the floor, hyperventilating, and wailing uncontrollably. Butts' mother was also overcome with emotions, and she could be heard screaming loudly at her daughter to get up while being whisked out of the courtroom by 3 staff members. But while their reaction may have presented a false impression of remorse or even innocence, the nature of their crime makes it seem like a false display. Their story takes us back to 2009, when the 25-year-old Erica was babysitting her goddaughter, Serenity, alongside her partner, Shanice. The 3-year-old Serenity was on a visit to the couple, while her mother, who was Erica's best friend, was on a trip at the time. However, the visit took a dark turn after Serenity supposedly peed on the floor, infuriating both Shanice and Erica, and in response, they picked up a belt and a plastic coat hanger to deliver the deadly punishment. After being subjected to intense beating for a prolonged period, the child would eventually give up the ghost. Seeing that the child was no longer breathing, Erica and Shanice tried putting the body on ice and exposing her to bleach in an attempt to revive her, but everything failed. By the time paramedics arrived on the scene, they found the baby with bruises all over her body, all because of a simple potty accident. The two would eventually be arrested and subjected to a highly publicized trial, with Shanice pleading guilty and Erica maintaining her innocence. By the end of the trial, Erica, who was described as a meek woman, and Shanice, described as controlling and aggressive, were slammed with life behind bars. While delivering the sentence, Judge Richardson spoke about how disturbing the pictures of the child's injuries were, and how cold-hearted the couple must have been to subject a toddler to such cruelty. It would eventually take the efforts of officers to wheel the couple out of the courtroom and straight to prison while the victim's family watched on in shock. But while Erica and Shanita suffered panic attacks following their sentencing, this next felon showed absolutely no emotions despite murdering her own children. Mitchell Blair. As Wayne County Circuit Judge Dana Hathaway prepared to deliver her verdict on June 17, 2015, Mitchell Blair stood in the courtroom remorseless and unapologetic. Throughout the trial process, the Detroit mother of 4 remained consistent in the accounts of what happened to her children and the circumstances leading to their death, a story that shocked the entire community. The horrific tales began in 2012, when Blair came home to find her youngest son pleasuring himself with a doll, and during the questioning process, she discovered that he had allegedly been touched by his 9-year-old brother, Stephen. Out of anger, she attacked Stephen and murdered him, before dumping his body in a freezer. Then, later in 2013, the same 9-year-old boy also allegedly informed her that her other 13-year-old daughter, Stoney, had also been inappropriate with him, leading to another murder, although she claimed Stoney's death was accidental. But for years, the kid's death remained a secret, until an eviction team bombarded the Martin Luther King apartment to remove the family over unpaid rent and found the preserved remains of the kids tucked away in the freezer. Friends and neighbors were chilled to the bones at the sight, but claimed there was little to no indication that trouble was brewing in the home, apart from the fact that they rarely ever saw Blair's 4 children outside. As soon as she was caught, Blair expressed no remorse, nor did she ever deny murdering her own kids, who she referred to as monsters, and up until her sentencing, her psychopathic behavior continued to escalate. But even before their deaths, Blair admitted to beating and burning her kids at the slightest offense. During the trial, she admitted to starving Stoney, putting a bag over her head until she lost consciousness, throwing scalding water on her and hitting her on the head over and over. She also detailed how she punched Stephen, made him drink Windex, burned him with hot water in his genital area, lifted him with a belt around his neck, and put a bag over his head until he lost consciousness. Court documents also showed that the other 2 kids were constantly subjected to torture by Blair, who punched the 17-year-old in the face, burned him on the back with a clothing iron, and repeatedly hit him with a 2x4. As for the youngest child, he was also found with over 25 scars and injuries, both old and new, confirming that the maltreatment wasn't limited to the 2 deceased kids. But before the judge handed down her sentence, Blair was given the chance to address the court. Instead of offering an apology to her victims, she instead chose to attack her children's father and his family, who were also present in the courtroom at the time, blaming them for not being present in the kids' lives. The father was also given the chance to address the court, although his comments were kept away from the public. For the horrendous crime, Blair was sentenced to life imprisonment without parole, and her parental rights for the surviving kids were also stripped in a separate lawsuit. Syoya Brown. It's been over 20 years since 16-year-old Syoya Brown received a sentence that shocked the nation for a crime that's been debated by both supporters and critics and remains one of the most disturbing cases to ever grace a Tennessee courtroom. As she prepared to receive the punishment for murder, unfazed by the impending possibility of spending the rest of her life in prison, the audience present was divided, with one side justifying her actions and the other condemning her. The incident leading to the courtroom showdown began on August 6, 2004, when the teenager brutally murdered a 43-year-old man named Johnny Michael Allen in his home. Allen, a youth pastor and Sunday school teacher, had initially met Brown in the parking lot of a Sonic drive-in located on Murfreesboro Road in Nashville. According to a detective working on the case, Allen approached the girl asking if she was hungry and up for any action, and Brown, who was being pimped out as a sex worker by a man named Garyon L. McLaughlin, or Cutthroat, accepted the offer. They both headed to his house, and going by Brown's testimony during the trial, she agreed to have sex with Allen for $150, but claimed they never actually engaged in sexual intercourse before things took a really dark turn. Allen's family, on the other hand, claims he wasn't trying to solicit her for sex, but instead was trying to help her. At some point during their time together, Brown pulled out her .40 caliber gun and shot Allen, before stealing $172 from his wallet and fleeing the scene. She would eventually be caught by the police and charged with homicide, aggravated robbery, handgun possession, and criminal impersonation. Despite being only 16 years old at the time, Metro Juvenile Court Judge Betty Adams decided it would only be appropriate to try her as an adult, taking the case to a whole new level. As the trial unfolded, Brown pleaded guilty to the charges. However, she claimed the shooting was in self-defense. According to her side of the story, Allen had allegedly intimidated her by repeatedly standing over her, forcing himself on her, and then apparently reaching for a firearm. Out of fear for her life, Brown claims she took out her own gun and fired first, ending Allen's life in that instant. The twist in the story, however, was that no firearm was ever found in Allen's home, leading to theories that Brown had actually murdered Allen as he slept naked in his bed in order to rob him. After a highly publicized trial, she was eventually found guilty of first-degree murder, felony murder, and aggravated robbery, and sentenced to life in prison. However, the case would eventually get a new breath of life in November 2017 after several high-profile celebrities like Rihanna, Kim Kardashian, and Snoop Dogg took to social media to express outrage over her sentence, leading to a retrial and a resentencing. In March 2018, the Tennessee Board of Parole finally ruled in favor of her clemency petition, and on January 7, 2019, Brown's sentence was commuted to 15 years plus 10 years of supervised probation. She eventually walked out of prison a free woman on August 7, 2019, Shaquan Duly. While this next convict wasn't handed the life sentence, the brutality of the crime makes it a worthy mention. This is Shaquan Duly, a single mother of 3 from South Carolina, who suffocated her 2 sons, placed them in a car, and staged a crash into a river after getting questioned about her parenting skills. Throughout the sentencing hearing, which lasted less than 10 minutes, Shaquan Duly remained quiet, safe for the occasional "yes, sir" in response to the judge's questions about the day of the murder. Since pleading guilty to murder earlier in March 2012, Duly had been pleading for mercy and forgiveness from her family in an attempt to gain clemency from the judge. But the nature of the incident made that a very slim possibility. Back in August 2010, when the unfortunate incident took place, Duly was a single mother of 3, living with her mother with no job and very little hope for the future. Records also showed that she was clinically depressed and upset about the death of 2 close family members, along with a losing battle with bone cancer at the time. Added to these troubles, Duly was apparently being berated by her mother for not taking proper care of the children. The situation would eventually reach a peak on the night of August 15, 2010, when Duly drove her 2-year-old child, Daphne Duly, and 1-year-old Shaquan Duly to Trump's Inn just outside Orangeburg and proceeded to suffocate them by putting her hand over their mouth. After the deed was done, Duly then packed their bodies into the car seats, drove across town to a boat ramp, put her Chrysler sedan in neutral, and sent it to the bottom of the North Edisto River. During the trial that followed, Orangeburg County Sheriff Larry Williams emphasized that the deaths were meant to be a direct response to the argument between Duly and her mother concerning the children the night before, claiming that the woman was simply fed up with being told she couldn't take care of her own children. However, when Duly's mother took the stand, she described her daughter as a very loving person and a good mother, stating how she'd never been in trouble with the law prior to the incident. While speaking in court before her sentencing, Duly latched onto her mental health struggles as a defense for her actions, while not denying any of the facts presented by law enforcement concerning the case. Pointing to her lack of criminal record, she also mentioned how she was not a bad person, and that the whole situation was just an isolated incident. On the day of the sentencing, Duly entered the courtroom clutching a Bible in her handcuffed hands, while dressed in the orange jumpsuit worn by jail inmates in Orangeburg County. After a brief address, the judge finally sentenced her to 35 years imprisonment for each of the murders, both of which will be served concurrently with no possibility of parole. Zenya Duly. On Friday, December 15, 2023, Zenya Duly appeared in court to receive the punishment for kidnapping and murdering a woman back in 2020. There were very few people present in the courtroom on this fateful day, save for a few members of her and the victim's family, but the eyes of the world were on the case, which had been widely publicized by the media. The horrific crime, which took place in Huntington, involved Duly and another suspect, identified as 40-year-old Frida Ingalls, who plotted the kidnapping of 30-year-old Bertha Bryant and 27-year-old Pollyanna Graybeal. According to the police report, after capturing the 2 women, Duly and Ingalls moved them to various locations throughout the city over the next couple of days, where the victims were hit in the head and body with fists and various objects. After they were eventually caught, the victims were taken to the hospital for urgent medical treatment, while Duly and her partner were placed under arrest. Their initial charges included unlawful restraint and malicious wounding, but those were eventually upgraded to murder and malicious wounding after Bertha Bryant succumbed to her injuries and died. According to the autopsy performed by the West Virginia Chief Medical Examiner's Office, the primary cause of death was ruled as intracranial hematoma, believed to have been the result of injuries inflicted on the victim by Duly and Ingalls. As for the only surviving victim, she was left with severe injuries, broken teeth, and bones that required extensive facial reconstructive surgery. The trial would eventually end in a guilty verdict. But before the judge delivered the verdict on the day of sentencing, Duly was given the chance to address the court. Reading from a prepared statement, she delivered an apology to her family, especially her mother, who she claimed didn't raise a killer. With tears in her eyes, she expressed regret for her actions, wishing she could take it all back, but it was already too late. As the emotional trial drew to a close, Duly was handed a life sentence with the possibility of parole, as well as 2 to 10 years for malicious wounding, which means that she may walk out of prison much later in her life, depending on the parole board. As she was being led out of the courtroom, Duly took one last look at her family and said her final goodbyes. Before we go on with the rest of the video, here's our subscriber's pick for today. Feast your eyes on this disturbing image showcasing a notorious black woman sitting in a courtroom with chains on her neck. The look on her face as she supposedly receives her sentence is of an unrepentant, remorseless criminal, and we can only imagine the nature of the crimes that led to her courtroom showdown. As we explore different stories of dangerous black women reacting to life sentences, this image stands as a symbolic representation of the reality of African American women in the justice system. As they say, if you cannot do the time, don't do the crime. But these women explored in this episode, and many more like them, delved into the world of criminality and broke down when faced with the consequences of their actions. Which of these stories shocked you the most? Share your thoughts with us in the comments down below. Now, let's get back to more shocking stories. Daphne Wright, April 18, 2006. 43-year-old Daphne Wright was all smiles as the judge read out her sentence, showing no remorse whatsoever for killing an acquaintance and dismembering her body with a chainsaw. For the prosecution, a life sentence wasn't near enough punishment for such a disturbing act of violence, as they pursued the death penalty as the only appropriate retribution. It was in February 2006 when Wright kidnapped a woman named Darlene Vandergeesen with a sinister plan in mind. According to the argument put forward by the prosecution, Wright was supposedly jealous of the friendship between Vandergeesen and her former lover, and as the rage boiled within her soul, she decided to eliminate her perceived competition by brutally ending her life, burning the body, and cutting her apart with a chainsaw. It was a crime worthy of a dark thriller. Wright then disposed of the remains in a Sioux Falls landfill and a Minnesota ditch, where they were later found by officers. The murder would later be traced back to Wright, leading to her arrest and subsequent trial. Since she had no prior criminal history or violent tendencies, both friends and families were shocked at the depravity of the crime she was capable of. On one hand, Wright's public defender argued that while the killing was premeditated, the burning and mutilation was simply an afterthought, so she didn't deserve capital punishment. But on the other hand, the prosecution argued that all aspects of the crimes were committed with intent, which makes her eligible for death by lethal injection. In a statement delivered by the victim's mother, she expressed forgiveness both for Wright and her mother, stating that God had helped the family forgive them for snatching their child untimely. It took 8 hours of deliberation for the jurors to finally agree that while Wright had the depravity of mind, she should not be executed for it, since she wasn't gaining some perverse pleasure from the act. Instead, the jury sentenced her to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. As she was being led away to spend the rest of her life behind bars, Wright's facial expression showed no remorse or regrets, and while she narrowly escaped death, her fate in prison would likely be worse than execution. Elizabeth Escalona, On October 12, 2012, a Dallas judge sentenced 23-year-old Elizabeth Escalona to 99 years in prison for beating her 2-year-old daughter into a coma and gluing her hands to a wall because she failed to adhere to her potty training. Earlier during the trial, Escalona pleaded guilty to felony count of injuring a child, admitting to hurting her daughter, Jocelyn Cedillo, in the most gruesome way imaginable. While she was presented with a plea bargain that would have sent her away for just 45 years, Escalona rejected the deal and instead asked the judge for a second chance. This turned out to be a big mistake. According to the details of the case, which took place on September 7, 2011, Escalona had reportedly kicked the 2-year-old in the stomach, beat her with a milk jug, before supergluing her hand to an apartment wall. During the ordeal, Jocelyn suffered bleeding in her brain, putting her in a coma for a couple of days, a broken rib, multiple bruises all over her body, severe bite marks, and skin torn from her hand from being stuck to the wall. At the sentencing hearing, State District Judge Larry Mitchell explained that although Escalona herself was a victim of domestic violence and sexual assault as a child, this didn't excuse her behavior towards her own daughter, especially considering the flimsy offense the child was said to have committed. But even after learning she would be spending the rest of her life in prison, Escalona showed no visible reaction to the verdict, while her family members wailed and wept with their heads in their laps. The initial sentence proposed by her lawyer, Angie Nduka, was a simple probation or a sentence less than 10 years, citing Escalona's troubled upbringing and struggles with drug use as considerable factors. But this turned out to be futile arguments, as Escalona was slammed with a way longer sentence. As of today, the mother of 5 remains locked behind bars and will be eligible for parole after serving 30 years out of her sentence. Andrea Cook. Back in 2017, a video showing 18-year-old Andrea Cook and her mother wailing in court after being slammed with a 20-year sentence went viral on the internet, drawing both pity and condemnation.
You're guilty of all 3 charges, sentence you to 20 years in state prison.
For Andrea, it was the beginning of a journey she never saw coming, owing to a miscommunication from her lawyer, who assured the teen she would not be getting any jail term. Andrea was a mainland high school student when the incident leading to her conviction took place in March 2017. It all began when she and her then-boyfriend Kendrick Bass established a criminal operation that involved luring unsuspecting victims to a secluded area and robbing them at gunpoint. Using the Meet Me app, Cook arranged a meeting with a 27-year-old drug offender named Perry Nita, with a plan to sell her 10 grams of illegal substances. But before picking Andrea up, Nita, who came along with a man named Purcell, felt suspicious and hid the drugs in the bush. Cook later climbed into Nita's truck and told him she had to get money, before leaving and then returning to the vehicle, only for a masked man to climb into the back seat and point a gun at Nita. The robbery attempt would eventually go south after Nita started struggling with the armed man, causing him to fire the firearm twice, with the bullet striking Purcell in the stomach. Seeing the brewing trouble, Cook and her boyfriend escaped from the scene, but would go on to carjack another victim the same way that same day. She would eventually get arrested on April 27, 2017, for both incidents. During the trial that followed, the prosecution acknowledged that Cook didn't exactly pull the trigger, but was responsible for orchestrating the meeting with the intention of committing a crime. The courtroom was quiet as a graveyard on the day of the sentencing, as the teenager looked on with fear in her eyes. The judge delivered the verdict that broke the decorum: guilty as charged, and 20 years in a state prison. Shocked by the long sentence, Cook and her mother broke down in tears, crying loudly as officers dragged her out of the courtroom. However, the story would not end there, as in 2018, the case received new life. Revisiting the plea deal that was previously ignored, the judge brought Cook back to the courtroom to deliver a new sentence of 11 years behind bars for all the carjacking cases, along with 20 years of probation, which will run concurrently. This time, Cook did not cry. Her mother did not wail, nor did she need to be dragged out by the bailiffs. Her face, twisted in agony, captured the grief and pain in her heart, knowing she would at least spend the next few years in jail, while she remains grateful that it wouldn't be as long as the original sentence. Thank you for watching. See you in the next one.